On June 17, 1967, Otis Redding walked onto the outdoor stage at the Monterey Pop Festival and looked out at 50,000 people he had never performed for before. They were mostly white. They were mostly young. They had come from across the country to see the Jefferson Airplane, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin. They had come to a festival that was being described as the beginning of something, the summer of love, the new culture, the generation that was going to change things. Most of them had never heard of Otis Redding. He smiled at them. Then he said, "This is the love crowd, right?" And then he began to sing. Danny Kowalski was 20 years old that June and had driven from Cleveland, Ohio to Monterey, California in a 1959 Ford station wagon with 3 friends and 2 sleeping bags and enough money to buy gas and very little else. He had come for Jefferson Airplane. He had come because a girl he was interested in had said that Monterey was going to be the most important concert in years, and he had believed her and driven 2,000 miles on that belief. He had arrived, sunburned and exhausted, and had found a spot on the grass near the stage, and had spent the first day watching performances that were good, and some that were very good, and none that had stayed with him the way he had expected something to stay with him. He had not heard of Otis Redding. This was not unusual. In the summer of 1967, Otis Redding was one of the most important performers in American music, but his audience was primarily black, and it was primarily Southern, and it was primarily the audience of the Chitlin circuit, of the Stax Records world, of the R&B charts that did not carry his name to the same places that the pop charts carried other names. He had released 5 albums for Stax. He had written Respect, which by June of 1967 was the #1 song in America. Not in his version, but in Aretha Franklin's, which she had transformed so completely that when Redding acknowledged it from the Monterey stage, he said it with good humor. "This is a song a girl took away from me." He had played to enormous black audiences at venues across the South and the urban North. He had, by every measure of the world, he had been performing in, arrived. Monterey was a different world. Otis Redding was born on September 9, 1941, in Dawson, Georgia, the son of Otis Redding Sr., a sharecropper and Baptist deacon, and Fannie Mae Redding, who understood from the time her son was old enough to make noise that the noise he made was not ordinary. He grew up in the Macon, Georgia area, where his family moved when he was a child, and he sang in church, in school talent contests, in any room where there was a microphone, or an audience, or reason to open his mouth. He won a local talent contest 15 times before the promoter told him he could not enter anymore because the outcome was determined before it began. He drove Johnny Jenkins and the Pine Toppers to a Stax Records audition session in Memphis in 1962 as the group's driver, and got 45 minutes of studio time at the end of the session, and used it to record These Arms of Mine, a song he had written himself, slow and aching, and constructed entirely around the specific quality of longing in his voice. Stax released it. It sold. He was signed. He began recording with Steve Cropper, the guitarist, and the rhythm section that anchored the Stax sound. Al Jackson Jr. on drums, Duck Dunn on bass, and over the next 5 years, he released a body of work that was among the most concentrated expressions of what soul music was capable of. The direct address, the urgency, the feeling that what was being communicated was not a performance of an emotion, but the emotion itself, transmitted with enough force to reach the back row of any room he was in. He was also a physically overwhelming presence, broad-shouldered, 6 feet tall, the kind of performer who filled the stage not because he was doing anything theatrical, but because the energy coming off him was simply larger than ordinary energy. He sang with his whole body. He leaned into the microphone. He gripped the stand with both hands when the song required it. He was not performing a soul singer. He was one. The Monterey Pop Festival had been organized in June of 1967 by John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas and producer Lou Adler. It was the first major rock festival of its kind, a gathering of the artists who defined the cultural moment, attended by an audience that understood itself to be the vanguard of something new. The lineup included Janis Joplin, The Who, Simon and Garfunkel, Jimi Hendrix, The Grateful Dead, Ravi Shankar. It was, in almost every respect, a white rock audience meeting a white rock world. Booking Otis Redding was the idea of Johnny Phillips and producer Alan Pariser, who understood that what was being assembled needed something it did not yet have, the real foundation. The deep channel from which rock and roll had drawn its energy, and which the rock audience had not always been asked to reckon with directly. They reached out to Stax. Stax said yes. Otis said yes. Danny was on the grass near the left side of the stage when Redding's set began on the evening of Saturday the 17th. He had gotten a good position, not the very front, but close enough to see the performer clearly, close enough that what happened on that stage was going to happen to him directly, rather than at a distance. He did not know, before Redding opened his mouth, what he was about to hear. Redding opened with Shake, a fast number, propulsive, built to establish immediately that what was happening on this stage was not going to be decorative. He moved through his set with an intensity that did not modulate much between songs. Each one arrived at the same level of total commitment, the voice deployed at its full capacity, the body in motion. The crowd, which had not known what to expect, began to understand what was expected of them, which was not careful listening, but something more active, more physical, more like the participation Redding's audiences at home had always given him. They gave it, slowly at first, and then less slowly, and then without reservation. Danny was not a person who cried at concerts. He was 20 years old and from Cleveland, and had been to enough shows to have developed, as young men do, a certain studied composure in the face of live performance. He was there to have a good time, not to be transformed. He held this position through the first 3 songs. During I've Been Loving You Too Long, slow, stripped back, built entirely around the sustained quality of Redding's voice over a minimal arrangement, something happened to him that he was not able to stop. He did not try to stop it. He stood on the grass in Monterey in June and listened to a man he had not heard of 48 hours ago sing about the specific quality of loving someone past the point where it makes sense, and he felt something move through him that was not about the song exactly, and not about his own situation exactly, but was somehow about both, and about something larger than both. He did not know what to call it, he just knew it was happening. He was not alone. One critic who was there wrote that Redding had the audience spinning like a chicken on a spit. Another described it as watching a man prove, in front of 50,000 people who had arrived with one set of expectations, that the thing they had come to celebrate was not the origin of what they loved, that the origin was older and deeper and was standing right there in front of them, 40 feet away, gripping a microphone with both hands. The set ended with Try a Little Tenderness. It began slowly, spare, almost liturgical in its restraint. Redding held the early sections with a quietness that had the crowd leaning forward. Then the song built, and built. And then it was not quiet at all. It was everything. The voice and the band at full capacity, the crowd on its feet, the evening air over the Monterey Fairgrounds carrying something that the recording captured but did not entirely contain. Redding left the stage. The crowd did not fully settle for several minutes. Danny did not speak to his friends about what had happened. He did not have language for it yet, and the language would not come for a long time. He drove home to Cleveland at the end of the weekend and went back to his life. His job at a hardware store, his apartment on the East Side, the ordinary accumulation of days, and carried something with him that he could not explain and did not try to.
He bought every Otis Redding record he could find in the weeks after Monterey. He bought them at a record store on Euclid Avenue. The proprietor, who was 40 and had been selling records since before Danny was born, watched him come in 3 times in 2 weeks and said, "So you finally heard him?" Danny said, "I heard him at Monterey." The proprietor looked at him for a moment and said, "Then you were lucky." On December 10th, 1967, 6 months after Monterey, the twin-engine Beechcraft carrying Otis Redding and 4 members of his band, the Bar K's, crashed into Lake Monona near Madison, Wisconsin. Redding was 26 years old. He had recorded a new song 3 days before the crash, a spare, reflective ballad called "Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay." He had never recorded anything quite like it before. He did not live to see it released. Danny heard about the crash on the radio the morning of December 11th. He was in his apartment getting ready for work. He sat down on the edge of his bed and stayed there for a while. He thought about the grass in Monterey in June. He thought about "I've been loving you too long," and what it had done to him, and the fact that he had not been able to find words for it then, and could not find them now. "Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay" was released in January of 1968. It became the first posthumous #1 single in the history of American music. Danny heard it on the radio while driving to work. He pulled over. He sat on the side of the road for a few minutes. It did not sound like the Otis he had seen in Monterey. It was quieter, more private, more like a man deciding something than a man performing anything. But it was his voice. Danny knew that voice the way you know things that have happened to you directly, without distance. He kept the Monterey program in a drawer for 40 years. He told his son about it, about the drive from Cleveland, about the grass in June, about "I've been loving you too long," and what had happened to him during it. His son asked what it was like to see him live, knowing what came after. Danny was quiet for a moment, then he said, "When I was watching him, I didn't know what came after. I only knew what was happening in front of me. And what was happening was the most alive thing I had ever seen." He said, "I drove 2,000 miles to see Jefferson Airplane. I drove home having heard something I would spend the rest of my life trying to describe." Otis Redding performed at Monterey on a Saturday in June 1967. He was dead by December. He was 26 years old. The people who saw him at Monterey say there has never been anything quite like it since. The people who were not there and only have the film say the same thing. Some things are true regardless of how many times they have been said. This is one of them. Subscribe to Untold Soul Legends. Every week, we find the moments behind the music that changed everything. The comments section is open. Tell us which Soul Legends story you want to hear next. If this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today.